Hi, good afternoon, Jackie. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Lovely to see you.
Mhm.
Now, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking and work, looking at the kind of workplace experience. And
Mhm.
actually, during this COVID period, obviously, there's going to be everyone's discussing the changes going on during this period of time, how it's going to impact on the workplace. Your thoughts on this? Your thoughts on how we get back into work?
So I think it's interesting. So for a while now, people have been talking about workplace design and about different ways of working and such like. And I've kind of always had this view that there's another dimension to people in the workplace, and it's not just about the physicality of the space and how well it suits their needs and how well their tech supports them. But it's also about what they actually, the emotional connection when they have there and how they actually feel working there, which is more about organizational leadership. And I've kind of thought about ways that you can bring the two together to understand that both are aligned, because I think without that, it's a problem. People have known, I mean, the healthy mind, healthy body thing, I think has been talked about for a long time, and about the cost of absence and things like that. But, you know, it's going to become increasingly important now that you align those two, because people by different groups have different views about returning to the workplace. And so I looked at some data that a friend had produced via the Wrongway app, and it was basically saying that 32% of people under 35 had reservations about returning, which kind of flies in the face of some people saying, oh, it's the young people who are desperate to get back. And that 75% of people over 45 were still very, very nervous about returning to the workplace. And that's before you start to think about how effective they can be, and anything that they're referring back to in terms of their past experience about being there. I know there's been some work done by ART Health Solutions, and that they've talked about people on the other side of the fence about the working from home. And brutal truth, of more than 10,000 surveys, 52% of people would actually prefer to work at home, and they prefer it. And these guys have done physiological testing to say that when they're working from home, their memory's better, they're less easily distracted, and their cognitive ability is better. So it does raise the question about why would people want to return to the workplace? And indeed, why would companies wish to force them to return to the workplace when it would appear that human performance can be better in some cases working from home? So, I mean, there's a raft of numbers in there. I think there's so much going on. We need something that actually correlates all of this data and starts to show a red thread through it of what really happens. And I would suggest, if you look at people like Google, you'll get a different response to, you know, where I was previously at GSK.
Yeah,
It's
I understand.
so complex.
It is a complex one, and it's tied very much in with the falling. And we discussed last week about productivity and how you can measure productivity. But there's been definitely a rise in recent years in the mental health issue, which I know you feel strongly about too, which actually people have enjoyed this period of time working from home because actually they've actually felt under less stress and anxiety disappearing, which arguably is helping productivity as well, isn't it? And it's the same we've got to try and bridge as we get through it. I mean, it brings into question the whole point about leadership and how leadership's got to change in how it communicates and engages with people, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it almost feels like a cliche to use the terms like transparency and, you know, listening, not talking at. And I think everyone nods sagely and said, yeah. But the reality is a lot of corporate communication is at people. And I think the ability to say, well, we're not going to say anything, you just tell us, is something that's massively underestimated, for people to share how they feel. I've worked with and used an app called Wrongway, as I say, that a friend of mine who worked on. And the data that she's got during COVID has been that the BAME community is less likely to raise sensitive issues, even though they feel them. And that's younger people, kind of up to age 40, so Generation Z and millennials, probably about 50% of the questions they raise in the workplace are anonymous, but the others they're prepared to put their name to. But when you get further up the chain, people aren't prepared to say things out loud, to say, you know, hi, I'm Jackie and I've got a question about the way we do this. The opportunity to do such things anonymously is really important. And leadership's got to listen what's really on the mind of people, and not make assumptions about what the future looks like. I was referencing it. There was an article in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago by a lady called Suki Thompson, and she talked about the fact that COVID has brought about some elements of what can be clinically classed as post-traumatic stress disorder. But when people go through something like that, there's a growth element on the other side, and what they expect going forward is going to be different to what they expected before. So I think the demands on leadership and the demands on corporations in terms of this is what I want to see from you will increase.
Well, this could be a positive period of time, couldn't it, coming out of this?
Yeah.
Because these issues have been building pre-COVID anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking when you said that, to back when, you know, when we first, everybody went from what was, you know, originally called open plan to flexi working and such like. For every article that you saw that said this is amazing and this is what's done for corporations, reduce footprints, everything like that, there was one saying, you know, it's really bad for your mental health. And I can remember playing ping pong with people posting saying, see, told you you've got it wrong, and being able to go back, no, we've got this article. I think it's going to be the same sort of thing, but I think people are going to become very vocal.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting piece. Will people become vocal? Because actually the whole point about the view is generally everyone's been very quiet and respectful. But actually they're just voting with their feet instead by leaving or doing something else. I mean, it's how we get that greater understanding of what's going on, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, some people, well, let's not forget, some people have worked continuously through this time. And you know, they need to be applauded and recognised. But I think where people have been given choice, it'll be interesting if we find organisations who are actually going to mandate return to work. You know, okay, you've been away long enough, you all need to come back to work now. You know, I know people who were required to be in the office and now have the evidence to say, well, I've done the job very effectively for 4 months from home, why would I come back? Thinking as I say that, I wonder if there'll be any legal challenges to that. But you know,
we had that conversation internally this morning.
Yeah.
Lauren who's an ex-lawyer, was saying she reckons there'll be a whole range of legal cases after this.
Yeah. You want me to return to work, and yet I've evidenced I can do the job effectively from home. Why would you do that?
And you're putting me in danger.
Yeah. And the other side of that is, okay, you are requiring me to work from home, but you haven't equipped me with, you know, the right chair, the right, you know, things that I can work effectively and safely. And again, everybody's seen the Google $1,000 each to set up your workplace. I mean, that is going to come to the fore. And only by talking to, understanding and giving employees the opportunity to say, well, here's how I really feel, and I'm not going to get castigated because I'm actually going to do this anonymously. Here's how I really feel. Will organisations know what they're dealing with?
Well, leadership's going to have to change anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
The one thing, the most common thread I get is about trust and how trust needs to be rebuilt. But that can only be rebuilt with listening, can't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, what was the cliche I used when we spoke last? Being in a relationship, and that's at the end of the day what an employer-employee thing is. Being in a relationship without trust is like being in a car without gas. You're going nowhere, but no matter how long you stay there. And I think the trust element is going to be critical, and it will have to be proven. And that's going to require some pretty significant responses from leadership.
Yeah, I think it is. And people talk to me about how much pressure the chief execs are under at the moment.
Yeah.
But actually, in some ways, it's been self-created, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lonely place at the top. but the opportunity to really understand what people are thinking, I'm not sure how they can plan the future without understanding that.
And what are your hopes and aspirations coming out of this? What do you hope happens through this period of time?
It seems like a soft word, that there'll be a lot more kindness and about understanding how the individual and where the individual needs to be to best contribute to the organisation, and that level of flexibility is afforded to people. I mean, if you cast everything forward with some degree of logic, you can see less people in the workplace, fact, as proven by the levels of redundancies, less people in the workplace 5 days a week, consequently less requirement for office space, and the need to align all those things to create communities where people can work effectively is important. GSK did some research last year about using places like WeWork, and did it as a trial. Well, let's reword that. Did it as a pilot just to see what happened, and you know, people were eternally grateful. I don't have to travel for 2 hours to get to work now. I don't have to travel for an hour and a half. And it was a bit like opening Pandora's box. So, you know, look what you could have.
But it still comes down to, I mean, the two issues that are bridged. A is people development, talent development. Mm-hmm. How do we make sure that talent gets developed in the right way? Mm-hmm. Actually, they need the interaction, don't they?
Yeah.
And how do we also make sure the culture is strong enough? Because we've got to get cultures back into businesses and values.
Yeah, yeah. I think revisiting culture is going to be a critical to, you know, what is it really like? But especially, you know, when people have career aspirations. I think somebody said on the call last week, oh, you can't create trust on a Zoom call, and I would contest that. So with the Plan B team, Plan B for Hospitality, we shifted from face-to-face speed dating for mentoring to using Zoom, and ended the first trial of it with a little bit of an, oh, that was interesting, because people's feedback was it felt more intimate because it was a one-on-one and there's no other distraction. So I think that trust can be built. It's about understanding how each individual works. And I think methods of communication will change to match the way that person, you know, some people it's just a phone call. Some people it's a text, you know, some people it's, you know, require an email. I think we've got to look at how we communicate with it, with you know, each person. I have known of people who haven't been seen by their line manager for 4 years. And they've still had a great reputation and have still done phenomenal output, but who relocated and were allowed to stay in the organisation and never saw anybody face to face. It's about desire and intent, isn't it?
It is. And there's also, I think that one of the interesting things is moving away a bit from a control, because a lot of business has been about control, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Which I think is one of the hard problems, to enabling and trust again.
Yeah.
Because actually everything we're talking about here is about allowing trust back into people, empowering people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about you, because you're involved, you're talking about the Plan B. Do you want to say a bit more about the Plan B?
Yeah, so Plan B in Hospitality was started by Anne Elliott, Holly Addison and Emma Causa. I think all names that will be known to a lot of people. I joined them quite early on with that and have been a mentor for them with varying groups. The objective was to get more women into senior leadership positions within the hospitality sector. They've succeeded so far with 2 women going on to board positions, which was the ultimate goal, but many people who've been promoted, and there's some great relationships being formed out of it with some pretty senior leaders stepping up and doing it. So that's kind of one of my giving back things and something I've thoroughly enjoyed. And it's very symbiotic in the relationship. I've learned just as much from the people that I'm talking to the extent that just before Christmas 2019, I met with Anne, Emma and Holly and a lady called Liz Kentish, who works within the FM sector. in October, we're going to launch the next phase of Plan B, which is Plan B for FM, which is another sector where women are not as well represented in senior leadership. So we're just getting sort of acknowledgements of interest from both mentors and mentees, and just shamelessly steal the same process and do it again, but this time consistently through Zoom, so we can apply it globally. And I think it's that can-do mindset. You know, you can sit back and say, oh, well, we can't do this for all these reasons, or you can say, well, let's have a go. Let's see what happens. So we've agreed with everyone we're going to trial it over a 3-month period where we're looking out to Asia and to the Americas. And at the end of that 3 months, we'll work out, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to do going forward. But to set up those mentoring relationships for people to use as they see, without trying, exactly to your point, to control the relationship. It's just two people meeting, and on first impression, okay, can I work with that person? Both ways. And where we get the match, then we'll carry on and do it. It's exciting. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, that's good. And have you seen progress? Do you believe this progress is happening within hospitality?
I think so, yeah. I think so. We were able to pull some core topics that people talked about, core issues, which a lot were about confidence, imposter syndrome, which I spoke about on a webinar that we had, and authenticity, about if you're working in an environment that is more male dominated, how can you be authentic, or do you have to be one of the guys? So we were able to pull topics together and do our first webinar on that, and that's the intent going forward, that where we start seeing trends, well, let's not restrict it to a group of mentees, let's do a webinar. I think we had somewhere approaching over 100 people on that webinar to understand what we're talking about.
That's very good. Now, you've had a fantastic career yourself, ranging from days in Gardener Merchant through to working with Aramark, both as UK Managing Director and Vice President of the Mid-Atlantic region,
yeah,
through to Spirit Pub Company, right through to what you've been doing with GSK. I mean, looking back on your time, it never occurred to me that you ever felt particularly like you had the imposter syndrome or anything, but looking back, what's been the greatest influences in your time?
Yeah, I mean, I see it, I can think of it in companies, but I think of it as, you know, going into a food orientated, food at work market. And then as that market changed, I was able to ride the wave of that change, and certainly within the Aramark days, to be more FM related. And that was about understanding, you know, the contracting model and how you both best created a service. The time in Spirit taught me more about the customer and more about the user than I'd ever learned before. Because when there's only one income stream, and that's what comes through the door and spends money, it doesn't half sharpen the mind. So I've learned along those ways, and that's what, at the time I joined GSK, they were looking for, someone with a hospitality background who would look at the services in FM and say, well, we need to think about what the end user, the customer, or whatever you want to call it, looks like. I'd have to shout out the time in Gardener Merchant, which I think was the first 12 years of my career, when vocational training was a passion from the top of the organisation. You know, when Gary Hawkes was CEO, that was his passion. And it was, you know, evidenced by all the people who were able to gain something from that. And I think we found it, some of us found it, you know, difficult at first to understand, why are we talking about all this stuff? You know, isn't it, surely it's a simple food at work model. But I think that was a huge support to me. And I worked with some, you know, great leaders who took a chance on me. And I now look and say, well, who are the people I want to take a chance on? Who are the people who say, okay, I mean, I've had more than one conversation where I've said, you know, you're not quite ready for this role. But it's less of a risk than going outside for somebody who appears to be ready, just might not. So I think it's shaped the way I've viewed working with teams and people, to give people the chance, both formally and informally.
And
it's been a ride.
Yeah, it's been a great career, hasn't it? And coming out now, what are your aspirations now for the future?
I'm excited.
You're not going to retire, are you? Let's be fair.
No, there's no rocking chairs and crochet for me quite yet. Everybody asked me that in the lead up to it because I've made my intent clear quite early on. The kind of strapline that I had was I want to do things that I enjoy and do well with people I like, because I think that's what I've worked a few years for. That's the choice that retirement, if we're going to use that word, that's a choice that it gives you. And so I'm able to cling to that. So I've already shared that, the plan B thing, that's my giving back thing. That's where I want to do some work. I've got an opportunity to work with an ex-colleague who knows some of the work that I've done elsewhere and said, well, can you come and do that here for us? So when travel opens up, I'll be doing that. And another one that I can't discuss in too much detail because it's not actually been launched yet, but again, 2 colleagues that I've worked with in the past who are launching a business which is going to focus on the workplace experience and how organisations need to respond to that. So they've asked me to work with them on that, which I'm going to do, and to respond to the fact that it's going to become more critical, and potentially in-house organisations are going to get shrunk somewhat. So the ability to call off advice and support, we think, will be heightened.
Advice and support from
externally. So to go to an external company and say, okay, we need to do this piece of work, we need to design this, it's going to take 12 months, rather than having a hired organisation to do that. They can call off the input as and when they require it. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, look, I think these are obviously very difficult days. We've obviously got a recession to come, but I am very hopeful about what we're coming out. I think we'll see a reaffirmation of values, people development again, I'm hoping.
My pension funds have said that the bounce back's always better. So I'm hoping that's true. I'm hoping that's true, but the people focus, you're going to need to have the best people available to make this work. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I also think leadership's got to change. We've just got to empower people, empower young ones, because we keep talking about young ones being under 40. Yeah. Well, you were a first director at what age? 24.
Yeah. That's the point.
Because somebody took a risk on me.
Well, that's the point. Actually, we all had director roles in our 20s or early 30s. And actually, we've got to get that back, that psychology again, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. When I look now at some people that I knew at a very early stage in their career and see where they are now, it's interesting because I look at it, well, I didn't see that one coming. But people evolve and change over time, which is blindingly obvious, but I think we've got to become more focused on it.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's too quick to judge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone grows in different ways. And I think that's and the other thing that's going to have to come back is that the whole issue on sustainability is going to get stronger, isn't it?
Yes. I've been recently doing a lot of work in that space and about, removing single-use plastics and the whole travel thing and the way we were going to work with people and such like. I feel like it's taken a bit of a back seat during COVID, but has to come much nearer to the fore as we come back out of it. Because I don't have data to hand, but there's plenty of it around of what's happened in the world since this has happened, and I don't think we can go back to that.
And I think the other lovely thing that's happened is people have found community again.
Yeah.
And actually they want to see that remain.
Yeah.
It's localism or whether it's actually community or people within business again.
I live in a rural community and we moved here about a year ago, and going out walking every morning or in the evening, without exception, everyone says hi. Car drivers on the lanes drive past you and give you a wave. They don't know who I am, but people seem to be just a lot nicer to each other, and kinder to each other.
How's COVID impacted on you?
Well, touch wood, nothing within my immediate family. I have in the past suffered from asthma, so I got kind of forced to not get out and about very much initially by my husband. He did all the shopping and things like that, which was a tough one for me. I kind of felt myself finding a different way of being. I think I've shared probably on LinkedIn, bit of a regret that I never found time to take care of me during my working life. You know, it was a kind of, oh, I'll get to that when I've done all this stuff. My advice now would be, if you can't take care of you, you can't take care of it or anyone. So a lot of focus on just, you know, looking after myself and well-being and such like. But I've been very lucky, you know, not a lot more than that.
No. And do you think, you're going back about growth, do you think as we're coming out, how we're going to help people grow is going to be a key piece?
Yeah. I think, you know, these are all experiences that we've had, and they need to transform the way we think going forward. You know, even if you think, okay, well, it's not affected me that much in reality compared to what's happened to other people. You know, I haven't had to worry about where the next meal's coming from, or paying the mortgage, or any of those things. I think a lot of the workforce who've had to go through some of that, they're going to need help to get back to a better place.
I mean, that's interesting, but 22 weeks of people working from home is going to change people tremendously, isn't it? None of us see how that's going to impact you.
Yeah. Well, it's like we spoke on the Food at Work webinar last week. People have changed eating habits. You know, they've not been going and picking, they've been doing different things. The weekend, everything opened up in terms of pubs, bars, restaurants and something that, you know, we felt obliged to, you know, fly the flag and go out and went to our favourite place and had a great experience. But we're not eating out anything like as much as we used to. Because in some places, it's just not the same experience. And I think, you know, the survivors will be the people who, you know, move heaven and earth to give the great experience, and people feel confident that experience is going to happen going back.
I mean, we were talking about this beforehand, weren't we? Just how the restaurant market's going to impact. And that middle market is going to be the one which struggles the most. That's why. Where's the reason?
The middle ground is always the riskiest ground, you know, the premium end. And I mean, even if you think of supermarkets, you know, you've got a premium Waitrose and a Lidl and Aldi. Well, that's well documented. What's happened in that space? It's the bit in the middle where people haven't really defined who they are, and people can't have an expectation of what that experience is going to be. You want to know that the experience in retail, be that hospitality or anything, is going to be worth the risk at the moment and worth the spend.
Yeah, again, there's another thing we were talking about, was all about the Spanish flare-up in 14 days, because actually, for everyone going, and there's no, I understand why you're going to summer holiday, but even the government grant snaps who got caught on day one out there.
Yeah.
In some ways, you knew that could be a risk that flared up at any time. It's an interesting one to take, isn't it?
We cancelled literally 2 days before it flared up. We were going to Barcelona for a long weekend to meet an ex-colleague who'd had to cancel a celebration, but we were still going to go anyway. We got the flights booked, we got the hotels booked. And I don't know, we just had a conversation and said it just doesn't feel right to go on a city break, to wander around in, you know, 28, 30 degrees with a face mask on and have possibly a very indifferent experience. Part of our vacations is always eating out and such like, in hotels. It's going to be a very different. Do we really want to do this? So we kicked the flights, cancelled the hotel and kicked the flights forward to October, thinking, oh, it'll be over by then. And literally 48 hours later, it all blew up.
Oh, amazing. And service is going to change, isn't it? Do you think service, how we treat people as they come into buildings?
Yeah. So the restaurant that we went to, our first, you know, kind of trip out, is a guy who's got 5 restaurants. We've known him for 15 years. He does a fantastic job. It's a neighborhood Italian is the best way I would describe it. And he's, you know, the sadness in his face when he's normally, you know, rushes across the restaurant, a great big hug, and he's just looking, but you knew he cared. And he played it very well. He'd really thought through the way it was happening and positioned everything so everyone was safe. But the restaurant didn't feel half full. It felt as normal.
Oh, that's really good. Well, Jackie, we're out of time. Look, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
It has, as always. And thank you. Look, I think it was the most fascinating period coming up. So I look forward to seeing you, all the work you'll be doing as we go forward.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Take care.
My pleasure.